Today I'm talking about Ousmane Sembène, widely known as the father of African cinema. Much of what we know about his life, vision, and personality comes from the documentary Sembène and from a collection of interviews in Ousmane Sembène's dialogues with critics and writers. Together, they reveal a portrait of a man who was not just a filmmaker, but a cultural revolutionary. Ousmane Sembène was born in 1923 in Ziguinchor, Senegal, and grew up under French colonial rule. The documentary shows how his early life was shaped by poverty, discipline, and a constant awareness of social injustice. After being expelled from school, Sembène left for France, where he became a dock worker in Marseille. But, as the documentary points out, this period became one of the most important chapters in his development. He read obsessively, learned about global political movements, and began sharpening his voice as a storyteller. He first became known as a novelist. In dialogues with critics and writers, Sembène talks about literature as a weapon, a way to fight colonial power and uplift the working class. But he eventually realized that novels had limits. Many Africans couldn't read French, and books barely reached the rural communities he cared about. That's when he turned to film. As he says in one interview, cinema is the people's evening school. In the 1960s, Sembène went to the Soviet Union to study filmmaking. Sembène, the documentary, shows how this training pushed him to see cinema as a tool for education, political awareness, and social transformation. When he returned to Senegal, he brought back not just skills, but a mission. His first film, Borom Sera, is considered the first narrative film by a sub-Saharan African. The documentary highlights how groundbreaking it was to show a slice of African urban life from an African perspective. Then came Black Girl, which exposed the psychological trauma of racism and colonialism. These early films made it clear that Sembène wasn't afraid to challenge authority, whether colonial powers, African elites, or even cultural norms. Across his career, Sembène created films that each carried a powerful message about African life and justice. In Mundabi, a 1968 film by Sembène, he explored bureaucracy and corruption through the story of a man trying to cash a money order, highlighting the absurd barriers ordinary people face. Hala, which was made in 1975, is one of his most iconic works, and he used humor and satire to criticize African elites who replicated colonial behavior after independence. With Chedo, made in 1977, he confronted the forced religious conversions and political struggles shaping West African history, so boldly that the film was censored in Senegal. Later in his career, Sembène made Gurel in 1992, which examined religious tension, dignity, and the politics of aid in modern Africa. Finally, Moulade in 2004, his last film, delivered a courageous fight against female genitalia mutilation, showing how women use solidarity and resistance to protect future generations. Together, these films form a blueprint for African cinema. One of the things emphasized in both the documentary and the interviews is Sembène's commitment to African languages. He believed that Africans deserved cinema in Wolof and other languages, not just French. He insisted that African stories should be told first for African audiences. This was revolutionary at the time. Throughout his career, Sembène made films that confronted issues many preferred to ignore. The documentary shows how even in his old age, he was still fighting to spark social change. But what stands out the most in Sembène, the documentary, is the depth of his humanity, his humor, stubbornness, and discipline, and absolute belief that ordinary people are the heart of African society. In the interviews, he often says that his job as an artist was to serve the people, not the government, not the elite, and not foreign critics. Sembène's legacy stretches far beyond his films. He built the foundation for modern African cinema. He proved that African filmmakers could tell their own stories in their own voices and challenge global assumptions about Africa. His influence can be seen today in filmmakers across the continent who continue the work he started. Ousmane Sembène is remembered not just as a filmmaker, but as a teacher, an activist, and a storyteller who deeply believed in the power of ordinary people. His life work shows how cinema can educate, liberate, and spark real change. And through sources like the documentary Sembène and dialogues with critics and writings, we can see the man behind the camera, his struggles, his convictions, and his lifelong dedication to giving Africa back its stories.